Today, let's talk about hips, and in particular, let's talk about hip mobility. We focus our mobility efforts on the shoulder and the hips because they are the joints that have the most global range of motion. We do have some mobility issues in wrists and ankles occasionally, but the hips and shoulders are the ones where adult human beings tend to be the most limited. Now, let's talk a little bit about these qualities of stability and mobility and flexibility, because often those kind of get thrown around in the gym and we sort of pile them all into the same thing. What's important to think about is stability is your ability to hold a position under load. Can I have my feet way out to the side and be stable there? Can I hold a weight over my head and be stable there? Flexibility is the range of motion. It's how far I can move that joint or I can stretch that muscle. But typically flexibility is tested and trained under external load, or I'm pushing myself down into the splits, or I'm pulling myself into a doorway to stretch my shoulders. So mobility is developing strength at that end range of motion. And I've talked about this in other videos, but what we really want to think about is when I get out to that end range, when my arms way out to the side or my hips are way splayed out, can I hold load and can I develop force there? And if I can develop force at the end range of motion, that is great mobility. When we talk about mobility and flexibility, flexibility is the potential to do great movement, and mobility is the strength and the force capability to do movement from those very, very flexible positions. When it comes to mobility in the hips, developing greater flexibility is a wonderful goal, and it's wonderfully helpful to your mobility, but it's only half of the story. So we can do things like hamstring stretches, we can do pigeon pose, we can do seated piriformis stretches, we can do frog stretches, but most of those are addressing tissue quality, the length of the muscles. Can we improve that lengthening of the muscles and then hopefully be able to apply that? What I like to do is do a couple of drills that are specifically focused on greater mobility in the hips. And the ones that I'm going to talk about today are going to be focused on things that you can do in between boulder problems, in between sets at the gym, or sitting in front of the TV in the evening when you get home from the crag. The first exercise I want to talk about is the 90-90 stretch and then the shin box. And in the 90-90, we sit on the floor and we have one hip externally rotated and one internally rotated, and both of the knees are bent at 90 degrees. We also have a 90-degree angle between our femurs, and so we're kind of sitting in this nice little position. And then we're just going to lean across the externally rotated hip and pull into a stretch there. When we get all the way to the end of our range of motion there, we're going to pull ourselves into that end range and then come back out. And we're going to kind of pulse back and forth between those. We can then switch positions, do the same thing on the other side. Then when we advance to what's called the shin box exercise, we're going to get in that same exact position, that 90 and 90 position with the knees and the hips. And then sitting nice and tall and keeping our hands up off the floor, we're going to rotate back and forth between those left and right positions. Many of us have a terrible time with this. This is a real hard mobility exercise. But moving into that range of motion, back to the other side, back to side one, is a really great way of finding those limiters in where your range of motion is and in where your strength is limited as you do these things. So the 90-90 stretch is a place to start, and then we can advance to the shin box. These are really great for climbers because we end up getting in those positions a lot where we have one leg dropped in, the other one turned to the outside, and being able to get our torso nice and tall, rotate those hips is an excellent skill, and it really helps with that development, especially in that rotation between the adductor and abductors. The second mobility drill is the lateral squat, or what we might call a side squat. And in this position, we stand in a wide stance. The feet are pretty far outside the box of the shoulders. And then we're gonna keep one leg stiff, keep that knee straight, and we're gonna squat with the other one. We're gonna go into a full squat if we can. We're gonna squat all the way down on that side, then come back up to the middle position. You can then alternate, go left, right, or you can do all one side and then switch and do the other side. If you can go into a full squat and the movement is relatively easy, then we can simply overload it by doing it in the goblet position, holding a kettlebell or dumbbell in front of our chest, or we can hold some weights in our hands. Some people are comfortable wearing a weight vest for this, but this lateral squat is really great. And you might start to see some limits in your range there, some limits in your strength. Generally, we'll see any weakness is gonna appear in like a movement of the torso rather than the legs. You're gonna be able to go ahead and drop down that leg, but you might have to pump your shoulders a little bit. And so just keep an eye out for that stuff as you're doing them, and make sure that you kind of work your way into these gently. That wide splayed position, that adductor abductor position isn't super strong in a lot of people, especially people that spend time running and cycling. And so take your time in getting good at this drill. But the second, and I think my favorite of the hip mobility drills, is this lateral squat. The third mobility drill that I really love is an exercise called the Sumo squat to stand. And we get in a stance that's not quite as wide as that lateral squat, but the feet are slightly outside the box of the shoulders. And we're gonna reach down and grab our toes, just like we're gonna do a hamstring stretch. You don't have to have your legs straight for this, and most people don't actually if they're gonna grab all the way underneath their toes. But when you get down there and grab your toes, the first thing we're gonna do is raise those hips and try to stretch those hamstrings a little bit. So it's an actively loaded hamstring stretch. So you're gonna raise those hips up, and then I want you to pull yourself down into a full squat position. And so you're holding onto those toes still, come all the way down until your hips are well below your knee and your torso is upright again. And so we're holding that low position with the hips down low. You're really stretching those the inside of your legs there. And then we're gonna get that chest nice and proud. And then we're gonna take those arms and we're gonna go open up my right arm and then open up my left arm, and I'm then gonna stand up. And once you're stood up, you can reach back down, grab your toes, stretch those hamstrings, pull yourself down into that low squat position, and then open up those shoulders again. For most of us climbers, it's gonna be like I'm lifting those shoulders out of there and you'll barely feel like you can get them up, and then it's real hard to get them straight overhead. And so this starts to cross over into an active shoulder mobility drill as well. And so the Sumo squat to stand ends up being a pretty good overall movement. This is great for people that have good joints, good hips, good knees, good shoulders. If you've got any sort of disorder or injury there, be aware and be careful about modifying it until you have that mobility back. Really important thing with a Sumo squat to stand is that overloading it with weight is difficult and probably not recommended. Most of us will get quite a lot out of pulling our hamstrings tight and then pulling ourselves down into that. And again, if any of these movements is super easy for you and you have excellent range of motion, that's super good news, because there's all these other things that you can work on to improve your performance. And if there's one thing and you're like, man, I do not need to stretch my hips, that's great. Check that box and go to work on another facet of your training. The really important thing here is that mobility is an easy thing to implement within a training session, before or after a training session. There's really no downside to doing a little bit of mobility work alongside your training on recovery days. The most important thing for all of us is to recognize if my movement isn't perfect, there are things that I can do to help improve it away from the rock.